What is up, everyone? Welcome to Gentlemen of the Corax. We have a really cool episode today. We're going to be doing a Kings of the Jurassic episode, which basically means that all members of the panel, we have three animals each from the following lists. We have land, sea, air, and fresh water, which also can include semi-aquatics. So from that, we're going to vote as a group on our animals to figure out what the top three of each category will be. So it's a really cool episode. But before we do that, we have a special guest here. We have Andy Denison, who has recently been making waves in paleo media with his publication regarding Saurophaganax.
The allosaur, formerly known as Saurophaganax.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I personally
they're
wasn't
way
super
worse.
I wasn't super familiar with this dinosaur before, but I definitely heard a lot of the flack that was going on while this publication was in the works. And then when it came out, apparently a lot of dino people, it seems like there's really positive reception on the publication, but a lot of people are sad that their favorite dinosaur is not really a dinosaur.
For what
Well,
it's
it's not
worth,
a theropod.
I'm also in that camp because Saurophaganax was my second favorite dinosaur as a kid after T-Rex.
Mm.
So I did not expect this result whatsoever.
Okay.
I actually originally thought I was like, wow, I'm gonna bring my second favorite dinosaur into the limelight, describe it better.
It's it's
Boy, I
that
was like,
I
Take,
say
take the first swing at it since it's cheery.
yeah,
it's the meme where the guy's like crying while holding the gun. It's like when I have to do the taxonomy on Saurophaganax.
exactly. I like it's honestly so funny to me in hindsight because I was so confident. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna find more autapomorphies and it's gonna be really distinct from Allosaurus. And man, I was so wrong.
So what were you doing? What were you doing when you realized, okay, this is a point that I need to bring it with a paper? What did you observe that made you realize that you could get a paper out of this?
Well, actually, so I was originally working on this project because of paleohistology. When I
Huh.
started, or right before this, I was in a paleohistology class with Holly Ballard, this amazing paleohistologist. And for part of that class, you need to go out and find something to section. It was like for your
Mhm.
own project, which you can get a publication out of. And I was like, I'm going to go section Saurophaganax. The museum's like
Right.
3 hours away,
Yeah.
just like a day trip. So I learned through talking with her that there was a previously kind of arranged deal where someone could section Saurophaganax with a deal that I think Andrew Lee arranged with Rich Cifelli, the former curator
Okay.
at the museum, that if someone wanted to section Saurophaganax, they would have to describe the material first. And, just trying to be an enterprising grad student, get some quick side project publications in and out, 20-minute adventure. I ended up deciding that I would do both the description and the paleohistology.
Okay.
And really, the description was where, the really cool stuff ended up being. So I'm really glad I ended up doing that. But one day I was just sitting down, going cranial to caudal on some of these bones. And I was like, okay, the post-orbital, definitely from an allosaur, the quadrates, indistinguishable from other species of Allosaurus. And then I got to the atlas, and I was like, oh boy, this I'm not sure this is Theropod. And I listed, I think, like 8 or so characters that made this really, really weird and made me question whether it was a theropod. And what I ended up, some of those ended up having to, I needed to walk back because I ended up
Mhm.
realizing after I saw some other publications that some of them could be viable. But by and large, about two-thirds of those made it through and are actually
Yeah.
discussed in the original
In,
paper. And
including all three of the original autapomorphies from
yeah,
the original description of the taxon.
exactly. I think that all three of those bones are all sauropod. I think
Mhm.
the atlas and the chevrons we can be really, really confident about. I
Okay.
think I'm a little less confident on the holotype just
Okay.
because, how that stuff is. But what's really interesting to me is just I had to dive through a lot of sauropod literature with this. And juvenile sauropods can really, really approach the condition that we see in theropods.
Interesting.
It's really, it was eye-opening for me because a lot of things that you'd think would just be like, oh yeah, very easy to distinguish them, really don't hold up if you are trying to look at juvenile individuals, especially in a quarry where everything is kind of disarticulated,
Yeah,
like
not mapped.
Maxwell's found
And
it.
like the map we have is not good.
Yeah, oh, we don't have a map. We don't have a
Okay,
map
okay,
of
there's
that
no
quarry.
map. Okay,
So we
gotcha.
can't even look at something and go like, this was found around the same place.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of just for a little bit of background, I'm sorry to talk for so
Yeah,
long.
no, please give us a rundown of kind of like the state of the research and then what your study did, your abstract
Yeah.
essentially.
Well,
Awesome. Thanks.
also before that, let's quickly backtrack to what exactly Saurophaganax was
Yeah.
before this, and
So,
then let's get into the research.
yeah, very eager, so I apologize again.
No, no, but
But
it's great. This is great.
but Saurophaganax was thought to be this really big Jurassic carnivore. It was thought to be more or less an Allosaurus with just like a few small tweaks on it. Things like accessory laminae on at least one dorsal vertebra, an atlas that lacked facets for a proatlas. For reference, the atlas is the first cervical vertebra of the neck,
Mhm.
and mid-caudal chevrons that were actually craniocaudally expanded, so they had this kind of anterior spine on them, similar to what we see in tyrannosaurs.
Right.
And that was
Those are the hammer-shaped chevrons that you see people talk about and make
yeah,
reference to.
yeah.
Yeah.
And pretty much how all this started was John Willis Stovall ended up discovering all this material back in 1931, 1932. And he actually called it Saurophagus maximus in a popular magazine article titled Big for His Day. But unfortunately, because it was a magazine article, it didn't, and for several reasons, it did not actually conform to ICZN standards, meaning that Saurophagus in 1953 was declared a nomen nudum. Then,
Mhm.
of course, the one stuff that everyone knows, or who's familiar with the material, of course, Dan Chury came back in 1995. He ended up giving Saurophagus the name Saurophaganax, or really the theropod. Technically, he didn't really rename it. It's kind of a sensu stricto, sensu lato kind of thing. But he ended up describing it in more detail and named those three attackmorphies that I mentioned earlier. And more or less, there's a debate that's been going on where people have been confused or uncertain of its taxonomic status and its relationship with Allosaurus. So
Mhm.
that has been causing a few problems. Some phylogenetic trees have kind of left it out because they're not sure about
Right.
it.
And
And
I want to touch on that point really quickly. To
right,
the people listening to this who are coming here for to understand the research that's been done. Important piece of context for Saurophaganax is that it's always been far more looming and important in the minds of the paleontologically interested than in actual paleontological research. And
yeah,
that's because when comparing it to Allosaurus, an animal that we have over 200 preferred specimens, we have a complete scale of an aggregate complete skeleton a dozen times over. Saurophagus doesn't actually tell us that much. It's very interesting and cool,
Mhm.
but it's not as useful to science and it doesn't receive nearly as much attention from the scientific realm. It's rare in the literature outside of the work specifically pertaining to it.
Yeah, and to be entirely honest, I talked to a lot of paleontologists over the course of this project, and whenever I've talked to them about this, most people just say it's just a big Allosaurus, you know?
Right. Right.
So most of people have just had their doubts about this thing the entire time. There just wasn't really anyone who came in and was able to figure out what was
Clean
going
it
on
up.
with the
Right.
material. So
Did you talk to Dr. Cherry at all?
no, so I tried to at SVP actually. I tried to catch him, but I think I got the wrong person, embarrassingly enough. That like it was. I went to a talk where he was a co-author, and I saw someone get up that looked kind of like Dan and talk to the person who gave the presentation. I was like, okay, that's got to be him. They have their name tag hidden and everything. So I
Mhm.
tried to just kind of find him and explain the situation and apologize and give him the background. Like, I'm so sorry. This was my second favorite dinosaur. I never expected to figure this out.
Mhm.
Um, and my advisor originally wanted to reach out to him, but that was something that was a point of contention among my co-authors and everything. So he ended up kind of not like explicitly reaching out to him or anything, or not really reaching out, but we did end up kind of rename or name Allosaurus anax kind of in honor of him.
In honor of him. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
they're
just
great,
made.
phenomenal name. I know
Thank you.
I kind of prefer Allosaurus anax to Saurophaganax, which I know getting attached to names is how we ended up in this situation in the first place. But I'm a Helena so reference to Agamemnon and Priam from the High King of the Allosaurs. Perfect.
Yeah, I like the name personally, but I saw when the paper came out, a lot of people on Twitter were just hating
Yeah,
it, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I
yeah,
need to stick with Allosaurus here.
yeah.
What else do you want from me?
Right.
And I want
And
to, of course, be as respectful as possible to Dr. Churi. It
Mhm.
was it was just a weird.
well,
The
and
spot was weird.
the other thing that I've gotten to is I've gotten so many people to be like, well, why isn't it Allosaurus maximus anymore then? And it's like, because
That-
that's only associated with the holotype, which
exactly.
isn't
So
Yeah.
Allosaurus.
So yeah,
to kind of
and if you could explain that ICZN rule for the people coming here to learn more about this topic.
awesome, I can do that. Thanks for directing me on this because I'm just vomiting everything out. What ended up happening is shortly after Dan Shurey named Saurophaganax, David Smith actually came in and did a morphometric analysis on the long bones and
Mhm.
ended up concluding that it wasn't really that dissimilar from Allosaurus. And he actually did like the official systematic paleontology naming thing of Allosaurus maximus, using the same exact holotype that Dan Shurey chose, that holotype neural arch. And unfortunately, according to the ICZN rules, a junior synonym of something is still considered valid,
Yeah,
meaning
you
that
can't bring it
Allosaurus
back.
maximus exactly can never be used on any kind of allosaur material again. So if there's any doubt regarding that holotype neural arch being from an allosaur, it can't be used. It just we have to throw out the maximus species name if we want to consider it a form of Allosaurus.
So tell us about Allosaurus annex and what your new paper found.
Well, honestly, not much changed across from like our previous understanding just because we were removing a few bones. We always really understood that it was a giant allosaur. I think I have some new mass estimates that are just based on femoral circumference, not super advanced stuff, but great for comparison. That stuff was putting it around like the largest of the three femora found from that quarry. I think we're around like 4.6 metric tons, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
So
and well, and the smallest there are three femurs from the quarry, and the
yep.
smallest is already a ton and a half larger than the largest known of the 200 referred Allosaurus fragilis specimens known.
Yeah.
That by itself convinces me that this is a different something,
Yeah. And
even
honestly,
though that's not super scientifically analytical way to go about it.
and I think one point of caution that I should point out is that I think a lot of these scales, like the raw measurements, aren't hugely different. It's
Mhm.
just how those kind of, when you plug them into these equations, how it just gets blown up really quickly. It's still an important thing to discuss. I mean, in a comparative context, you have Allosaurus, and then you have dinosaurs that are heavier by this method, like Suchomimus and Acrocanthosaurus, and then
Mhm.
Allosaurus anax is even on top of that.
Larger than that. Right.
So for that, that really stands out to me. It doesn't really, size alone really isn't that good of a taxonomic feature, but it can really help
Yeah.
support when
You can't
combined.
direct a taxon on that, but in terms of making a convincing argument,
Yeah,
that alone convinced me.
thank
Um,
you.
well, I mean, I've been kind of aware for the I've suspected that Snacks was chimeric for a while. Like I couldn't really put my finger on why, but something about the vertebra being everything else being so very Allosaurian,
Right.
the claw and the femurs mainly, and the vertebra being so completely different. And then learning that there was basically like the map, which it turns out there is no map,
Mm.
was very poor. I was like, what if? I had nothing to base on. I was just a sophomore in my undergrad, but I was like, what if I was thinking that there were two giant theropods from the quarry, but a sauropod was not what I had in the cards. But I'm not I made one of the least surprised people by this paper.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's not some kind of huge emotional thing, and someone reasonable came to the same conclusion because I kept
Mm.
like abducting people from like OSU and being like, is this reasonable? When I show you this picture of this bone compared to that bone and that bone,
Yeah.
but this is more like that?
Yeah,
And
axial features in dinosaur skeletons are usually pretty conserved. So if something's going to change, it's probably not going to be the entire structure of the neural arch. It's going to be something
yeah,
different.
and really, I did try to do a deep dive on like similar characters that we see in theropods, and there are
Mhm.
some that display somewhat similar or like accessory lamination or similar lamination to begin with, but really they're nowhere close to a match. At
Mhm.
least in my book, either like the closest matches you really have are just pointing to Carcharodontosaurus and going, they sometimes display this
Do
very
this.
specific kind of accessory
Yeah.
lamination. Or there's, I think, Luso.
Tyrannosaurs have hammer-shaped chevrons.
Yeah, and like the chevrons, it was that really stuck out to me. Like the second I saw those chevrons, I was kind of breaking down. Oh,
Gotcha.
I shouldn't say that, but it was pretty obvious to me that there was something up very quick.
Gotcha. So do you want to talk a bit about Dr. Weedle's involvement? I'm saying his name right. I've never actually heard anybody say his name.
Weddle.
So Dr. Weddle,
Yeah,
involvement because so that was, I mean, before you were just like one grad student, like going against a lot of built-in love for this animal. But and I heard, and that was definitely the vibe. Where, oh, it's just some grad student giving his hot take. But when people were, oh, Dr. Weddle's involved, that's something different.
yeah,
And if there's one man I trust to tell me if something's a sauropod vertebrate or not, it's the man who ran the sauropod vertebrate picture of the week blog for like 15 years. So,
so Matt Matt has been great to work with. He was kind of the last person to we actually got on the project
mhm,
because I have like my committee on there, other people at OSU, and Drew because he kind of had that pre-existing arrangement, right?
mhm,
And I was really certain at this point, like when I was reaching out to Matt, that one, the chevrons were definitely sauropod. The atlas was definitely sauropod. And I was a little like shaky on the neurology, but I wanted someone else's opinion.
mhm.
And really, what I should like emphasize too here is we considered the holotype neural arch a nomen dubium because it's very, very difficult to place.
Mhm.
And we ended up talking a lot about this. I think as he talks about in one of his SV POW posts about this paper, we flip-flopped on things quite a lot.
Mhm.
And we kept finding like different things. Some things were saying, no, this is more theropod, but pretty much we kept tearing through those things. And at the end of the day, if you have something that's kind of conflicted like this, it's probably best to consider it a nomen dubium because
Yeah.
then you really don't know what to refer, any kind of bones to.
Right.
And
And
really,
and for what it sounds like, it sounds like the team is like 80% sure that it's sauropod.
yeah, I would say I'm definitely in that boat. I'm
Gotcha.
very confident that it's going to be sauropod because
Mhm.
I mean, kind of thinking about it in a logical way, we don't really see similar lamination on other theropods.
Right.
Not really. And that's quite a substantial sample. And
Mhm.
really, like
And
you're telling me that this neural arch, which displays accessory lamination, which is very commonly seen in sauropods, found in a quarry disarticulated
all
with
sauropods.
yeah, with a bunch of sauropods. I think
Yeah.
the material's
Including
like
juvenile
90%
sauropods.
apatosaurus, yeah,
Yeah.
including ones
It's
with
it's
tiny, tiny vertebrae like that big. So
it's one of those things where you would need to find another vertebra like this with the rest of the skeleton. And if it's going to be a theropod, it's not like any of the theropod groups we get in the Morrison. And it would have to be like a secret cryptic lineage of Dilophosaurid or something.
Yeah.
yeah, it would
Let me tell you.
really like in my book, it's almost like a nano-tyrannus thing where like
Oh,
really to convince me at this point, I'm probably going to have to see like an articulated allosaur with these
that
accessory limbs,
that neural
like
arch. Gotcha.
on the dorsals.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just it's such a weird character. And what's really weird is that the laminae actually they're not just laminae themselves, they project backwards off of the rest of the vertebra.
Mhm.
And that's really strange. I don't know if there's any lamina in Theropoda that really has that same kind of character, where it's just, you have like a typical theropod vertebra. You kind of have like the laminae almost like painted in. This is like a child just was coloring outside the lines on
Mhm.
like a coloring book.
Okay.
It's very strange, but it's much more like what we see in sauropods, right? They kind of start off more stout. Some of them have bifid spinous processes, which kind of poke backwards, and then over the course of ontogeny, the neural arch kind of lengthens, right? So it
Mhm.
becomes very tall, and that's part of that kind of process, and those ontogenetic changes really are part of what makes this
And
process.
with the emergent plasticity in sauropod, juvenile sauropod vertebrates, vertebrae,
And
uh, it's an even more it's another point in the favor of this thing not being theropod. So,
exactly,
uh, yeah,
and
I
really,
think you're probably bang on the money, to be honest.
thanks.
So, so moving on from that to the Allosaurus anax, new high king of the Jurassic period. Uh, what what about the remaining material made you decide that erecting a new taxon would be appropriate?
Well, there are a few things that seem to distinguish it from other types of Allosaurus, right? And as
Okay.
you were saying, we have a really good understanding of Allosaurus as a whole based on
Mhm.
all those specimens we have. So if there's anything that really kind of stands out, it's really, really noteworthy.
Mhm.
And there were just some things that I kept looking at that were I looked at and I said, I can't find any kind of good match. But they were all on decisively theropod specimens, right? So
Mhm.
things like the post-orbital, which has a medial surface, which is a pretty much perfect match
Mhm.
for out that of Allosaurus, just seems to lack some of that more typical like ornamentation that we see on it. And it doesn't seem to be the result of wear. That
Mhm.
some of that is really nicely finished bone. So I kind of didn't have much of a choice but to consider its own thing. And like you were saying,
Okay.
with size, that's kind of a factor too. And one thing that I really didn't expect to like play any role in this was the fibulae as well. I haven't found like a lot of large theropods have these really cool kind of medial fossae on their fibulae. Like I think Tyrannosaurus has this, I think Ceratosaurus has this, but I haven't seen it in any specimens of Allosaurus so far. At
Okay.
least like not in the published literature.
Yeah.
I might be wrong about
But as you and thank you for actually getting good figures of this of the formerly known as snacks material figure for the
that.
first time.
Thank you.
The rest of it, everything that would be actually distinguishable if you're looking at the skeleton of the animal, are very Allosaurian.
Yeah,
The claw, the femurs, etc.
exactly. And I think something I found really funny too, and I don't mean to like segue this into something else, but it was really fun to see all the misinformation about my project on Twitter because I saw like Photoshop claws where they had taken like pictures of it, but then squished it. So it looked at like it had a dramatically different angle
Yeah.
than Allosaurus did.
Mhm.
I don't know. And people were starting rumors that I was shrinking the taxon. So it's just like, no, the big bones were all sauropod. Now
Right.
we're
Right. I mean, really nothing is like the thing people understand as Saurophaganax is real, is still real. Like
yeah,
we're like we didn't lose some like mythological giant predator. We've just like got a much clearer understanding that it's an allosaurus, which was something that we already thought it was. So
yeah,
not much has changed. It's really the only way that you should be disappointed is attachment to a name. And names, as Dr. Weddle says, is our hypotheses and
yeah.
not cultural. I mean, like they end up that way down the pipe, but they're scientific hypotheses and not cultural institutions. So,
Before we move to the next segment, I did want to ask for you to specify because I feel like on Reddit especially there is a lot of arguing going on about whether like Saurophaganax is still like a valid name just used for a sauropodomorph or if it's just like completely dead. So I
yeah,
wanted
people were
you
like,
to
why didn't
clear
you
it
erect
up
a neotype?
once.
Well, okay. I feel like this is a great FAQ kind of thing because I see all this
Mhm.
stuff around. Well, first of all, I don't think the misinformation regarding like Saurophaganax remaining like a valid name just attached to a sauropod is actually a remnant of the abstract. Or like a remnant from a previous version of the paper
Right.
when we were just more confident in it being sauropod.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I forgot to change the abstract. That's my bad. I apologize for
Well, it
that.
leaked online,
Um,
so
oh yeah, and
yes, that's
people
It wasn't even
Yeah,
done yet.
no, and that was kind of, we kind of bounced back and forth, like I was saying
Mhm.
earlier, on what to do with all this stuff.
Mhm.
Then I guess regarding the not naming a neotype, the problem is we could name a neotype, like that is something we could do, but I think part
That
of the
are
stress.
you a neotype for a bucket of bones? Are you out of your mind? Like, that's not going to happen. Like if it was Tyrannosaurus Rex, I'd understand.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I
Well,
think also it'd have to be different, right? You can't just go, oh, well, you'd have to show it was significantly different from
yeah,
Allosaurus, the
and you'd
already
have to have
existing
better
genus.
material. Like you would have to have like a completely. You would have to have like at least like some articulated and refer material referable to the same individual, which we don't have.
so regarding like the name, really, if we did, I have no doubt whatsoever that if we did name a neotype, Saurophaganax would be rolled into Allosaurus at some point or another, and
Gotcha.
then it would be considered
Mhm.
Allosaurus maximus. So really,
Right.
we could fight to save the Maximus specific name, but my understanding is the ICCN has been very slow with some of that stuff as of late.
Mhm.
And I'm a PhD student, and to be entirely honest, there were a bunch of other people working on Saurophaganax.
Ooh,
So
okay.
when
More
I
to come.
started this project a couple years ago, I was the only person who was working on it. And like I talked to the curator and I was like, no one's working on a description, right? No one's working on paleohistology, right? And no one was,
Mhm.
I think, at the time. But then a lot of people came in and started doing other work, not even like exactly what I'm doing, but things, just general research on the material. And I was like, well, crap. I don't want to just let all these people like publish their stuff and then like with a name that I'm probably going to strike down 5 minutes
Right.
later.
Gotcha.
So better, I think, to do that on quite a few fronts. And then by not naming a neotype, I think this gives the generic name a much better chance of standing in the long run. If we can find that, oh wow, there's a sauropod that has these really unique laminae on this vertebra or something, and like as a juvenile or whatever,
Mhm.
maybe we could keep the genus.
Right.
But otherwise, I don't really see that happening.
Okay.
That was the only way. And you know what?
Okay. So
It was
I've got two more questions before we move into the fun segment where we like rank our favorite animals. But the most common criticism I see, and I think you could definitely provide a far better defense than I could, is that why did you decide that the new material was sufficient to erect a new taxon instead of referring to Allosaurus in the tournament?
So that's a great question, honestly. And part of that, like, that's definitely a viable alternative explanation. Like,
Mhm.
we could have just called it Allosaurus indeterminate. But I do legitimately think there are some things that distinguish this taxon or this allosaur from others, for one thing. Additionally, I was advised very, very early on in this project by full-fledged professors that if anything happened with the holotype and it was not Allosaur, that I really needed to rename the actual like theropod, right? Make sure that it
Mhm.
has a valid name. Otherwise, someone else is going to come in and rename it, regardless of the validity of that name. So at least if I'm
Gotcha.
doing that,
Okay.
then it's not someone else kind of coming in and just doing a
And
haphazard.
working with so you're making sure that other papers succeed
Yeah,
and don't have something invalidated immediately. Okay, that very
exactly.
very good.
So at
Um,
least at this point, like I've actually examined the material and everything, and I actually have hypotheses regarding like what's distinct, and I've actually just like touched the bones and made giant photogrammetric models of the bones, that kind of stuff to kind of better explore and get an idea of what's finished bone, what's not, how like what's reliable, what's not. And really, it was, I mean, honestly, when in doubt, I think it's better to name something than not name it. If it gets
okay.
folded into Allosaurus, it just indeterminate later on, totally fine.
That's
But
and that's still on the table. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it could.
but now we're confident it's a theropod and maybe so and then that leads me to my final question. What do you think the next step? What areas do you think that more research into Allosaurus annex? Like what do you think further research?
So honestly, I think the best further research that could be done is just doing a wide scale analysis of like all of the cranial material or all of the associated elements of Allosaurus. Just really, really
Mhm.
make sure that there's not some specimen out there that I haven't seen because it's not published in the literature that could kind of suggest this goes one way or another, right?
Well,
But then at the same time, I'm not sure how probable. If I had to guess, I would say it probably will not be rolled into Allosaurus just without a specific name.
Mhm.
But I mean, we kind of have to need to get a better understanding of the relationships between all these Allosaurus specimens as a whole, right? And just see what's going on with them.
with
Because
that in
now we
mind,
have like Allosaurus europaeus, now we have Allosaurus anax, Jemansini, fragilis.
Yep.
with that,
I mean, that's an accurate picture. Yeah, Ezekiel, go ahead.
I was going to
Right.
say there was the recent Allosaurus europaeus reassessment.
Yeah.
Have you plugged any of your bones into that phylogeny? And are
I
there
haven't
interesting
yet.
results? Okay. Because
I
I remember, I'm trying to remember your paper. It sounded like you were saying there were some traits similar to Jim Madseni, and I might be incorrect there.
So there are some traits similar to
Okay.
Jemansini. Something like
Which in the Allosaurus europaeus paper, that was aligned with Jim Madseni more than Fragilis, which is why I was asking. Okay.
So the big thing I was worried about right off the bat was that they're going to say something like the post-orbital did not have, or of Allosaurus europaeus did not have that kind of cranial ornamentation that we see on the Allosaurus anax holotype. But
Mhm.
that's not the case. It's not really, there's not really enough there to kind of make that comparison. But I would love to plug that material into that matrix and kind of get a better understanding of what's going on there. Then a lot of the overlap, I don't think there's too much overlap though, because I think Allosaurus europaeus is largely like the partial skull and a lot of cervical vertebrae. And with Saurophaganax, it's at this point like a post-orbital fragmentary quadrates, like one or two cervical vertebrae that are both fragmentary. And then that's really all that's available for comparison. So I'd love to do that comparison a little bit
Mhm.
more in the future. And I do hypothesize that if you were to crunch all the numbers on this, that it would probably come out closer to Jemansini than a Fragilis.
Okay.
But I really would just need to dive in there, right, and do something with the matrix.
Right. Okay, cool. So I've got more things to say about Allosaurus annex or about Allosaurus generally. But we can save that for the time when we talk about Allosaurus in the Kings of the Jurassic part. So
Yep.
Perfect.
I
It's kind
really
of
appreciate you sharing all of this,
it was
Andy.
great.
I think it's awesome.
No,
it's
I'm happy to talk about it. I'm really glad that it's gotten the recognition and just attention that it has. I didn't really expect it at the time. Once again, I thought this was going to be like a 20-minute side project, more or less. And I'm just as shocked as I think everyone else is that, to figure out that Snacks was a chimera and all that fun stuff. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
it's kind of funny how quiet the two Marine guys have been like this whole discussion.
Well, I'm technically a Marine guy in the strictest sense of the word, but
you
I'm also
are
an Allowhead, if you can
well
figure it out.
diversified. You're a well diversified paleontologist, not just a Marine guy.
I'm just a fish guy.
Yeah,
That are cartilaginous.
I'm like doing prep on a fish right now, like as we speak.
With all of the Saurophaganax talk out of the way, let's go into the kings of the Jurassic. So we're going to start off with land. Who wants to share their picks for the land animal, the land kings of the Jurassic?
Ezekiel, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure, I could do that. So I picked Jeremiah sinensis, which is potentially the first of the placental mammals, which is all mammals today except for like the marsupials and the monotremes, so the egg-laying mammals. And I went with that because sure, it's small and it's living under the feet of dinosaurs, but which one of us is here now?
Yeah.
What up? Um, I also went with Mongol Arachne jurassica, which is the largest known spider in the fossil record as of right now. It would have been a really large orb weaver, kind of like some of the golden orb weavers that live in Southeast Asia. And it's from China, so I mean, potentially it kind of evolved near that equator, then just hung around there as the continents moved around it. Or at least that clade did. And then I have Sinraptor dongai. It's a Metriacanthosaurid, also from China, but it's kind of dominating that environment as far as predatory niches go. And I think the Metriacanthosaurs as a whole are really important for understanding the Jurassic. because they were really common throughout Eurasia, except for seemingly like Spain, Portugal, and the UK. I don't remember if there's any from
Which
the
are
UK.
basically like an extension of an extension of the Morrison type biota.
Yeah, yeah. So Spain, as we were talking about with Allosaurus europaeus, that seemingly is where they were Allosaurus Morrison formation type biota was getting to. Maybe they were getting into Germany. There's a few teeth that might be from Allosaurus in
Mhm.
Germany. But otherwise, throughout most of Eurasia, we're getting these metriacanthosaurs as opposed to allosauroids or any of the other more
Or
common groups for
metriacanthosaurs
allosaurs.
are allosauroids. They're not
Yes,
allosaur. They're not
it's
allosauria. They're not
yeah.
allosaurians. Yeah.
Taxonomy is fun.
Yeah, I think the only Allosauria is Allosaurus is an outgroup, and then Carcharodontosaur.
That
It-
sounds
it-
correct. Yeah, yeah. So
uh,
yeah, those
yeah.
are the ones
So
I
and
picked.
and to touch a bit on kind of these like East Asian assemblages versus classic Jurassic Western North America. The East Asian assemblages have a much higher portion of stegosaurs in their record, like very, very intense stegosaur diversity of all
Yeah.
different sizes, which is very cool.
Well, and I believe there's one of those that's actually potential. One of the Asian ones, I think one of the Chinese ones, is potentially the same genus as Stegosaurus. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of back and forth on that I am not up to date with because
Mhm.
Stegosaurs are not my field.
Mhm.
So Cole,
Cool.
what are
Good
your
picks.
picks?
All right, I had selected number one, Chimerosaurus lentis. It is probably by sheer bulk the most best represented dinosaur in the entire fossil record. It's a typical. It's John Foster called it the Rodney Dangerfield of dinosaurs. Doesn't get any respect despite being like the most commonly found dinosaur on the planet. I mean, not commonly in North America, but the most well represented dinosaur. It's got a complete articulated specimen known from Dinosaur National Monument. I think it's missing like one bone or something like the tip of the tail, but the Dinosaur National Monument specimen that's now at the Carnegie. It's just an awesome animal that, like, even if it's just the most typical, if you think about the Jurassic, what the most typical animal is a giant, long neck dragon thing. So, and I think that's just so cool for understanding these dinosaur ecosystems, how different they were from modern ones. So, my second one was Morganocodon, which is another little mammal guy from the early Jurassic of Europe, and it is um, the first. I think we've got some stuff that's probably earlier, but it's the first definitive one of them. Definitely the first known that had what makes a mammal a mammal. One of the most important anatomical things that makes mammals mammals is that whereas every other group of tetrapods, the jaw articulation is between the articular and the quadrate. In mammals, they shift those. They shift the angular, surangular, and articular up into the ear, and it's now our ear bones, and that joint is moved to the dentary. So at some point, you need to have this migration of a joint, which that must have been a crazy in terms of like how do you even get from this ancestral form to this more derived form? How that would have happened? We don't really have a good idea because the mammals are tiny and tiny things don't leave good bones. But Morganocodon is the first time that we're seeing that shift in the articulation of the jaw, and it's sometimes not consider depending on your definition of mammal. If you can have a crown group definition of mammal, crown group being the last common ancestor of all modern mammals, or like a more general definition, Morganocodon is in some ways the earliest mammal.
That's really interesting. I didn't know any of that. That's cool.
The last one I picked was Yangchuanosaurus. It's a metria. Is it a metriacanthosaur?
I believe it is. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
like
but it's way
90%
different.
sure.
It doesn't look like Sinoraptor or Metriacanthosaurus. It has this big, like robust, like it kind of shortened skull, almost a Belosaurian. This like a curving maxilla with like an almost like a Tyrannosaurian type curve in the maxilla with these giant teeth. And it got to be large. Like there's referred material exceeding 10 meters in length for like femurs and stuff like that. And it was, I think, probably the king of Jurassic East Asia, in lieu of Allosaurus being there, which is, as we know, is the real high king of the Jurassic period. So yeah, those are my picks.
Awesome. What are your picks, Jared?
Okay, I'll do my best. So, um, when I when I was going into this, I went through the same dinosaur phase that every like kid goes through, but I only rediscovered this interest in paleo at 20 with fish. So I had to dig way back in the archives. And I think a lot of kids, their favorite dinosaur is probably Dilophosaurus. It's interesting because it's an Arizona taxon, so that's pretty cool. You don't get a lot out of there, and that must be home field advantage for you too. So I could see that you also chose it. Not surprised. And regarding these next two, let me just rewind a bit too. Dilophosaurus is also one of the earliest large theropods, and these early and middle Jurassic, um, they're like harbingers to the huge theropods in the future. I just find that interesting. I'm a big fan of anything that is in transitional to these bigger forms. I like basal taxa.
Yeah. It's Dilophosaurus is really the first known like giant like predator dinosaur. There was like earlier stuff in the Triassic, like Gojirasaurus and stuff like that. But Dilophosaurus is really like the first we've got like a good skeleton of, and we understand what it is.
Yeah.
And it's an extremely striking animal as well. Very unique.
Yeah. I'm glad it's not just like this boring, unornamented, like whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, and again, all of this that I'm about to say is shallow take because I don't know my Jurassic stuff. But moving on from Dilophosaurus, I also chose Cryolophosaurus. I don't know how legit this is because there are a lot of, at least in like my field of study, with Cretaceous Mosasaurus and stuff, a lot of the stuff that comes out of Antarctica in these Cretaceous deposits are actually pretty terrible, and a lot of them might not be legit. So I don't know how it is with the Jurassic animals, but Cryolophosaurus, if there's no contention about its taxonomy, I think is a good candidate too. It's another large one, and it's from, again, Antarctica. Like that's the one place I want to do field work.
The ice, it's the ice lizard. It's like, Cryolophosaurus is the best dinosaur we have from Antarctica. Like,
there you go.
Easily.
Yeah, and
it's got a decent skeleton. Sorry, Zethan.
I was gonna say, from what I know of its taxonomy, it's basically is it just a very early theropod, or is it maybe a really early megalosaur? So it's bouncing around a little bit, but it's reasonably complete and not really in doubt if it's something different.
Yeah, I think most recently it clades with Dilophosaurus, but is not a ceramic. Neither of those things are ceratosaurian or coelophysid. So
interesting.
Some other secret third thing.
I'm pretty sure Adam Marsh's big monograph on Dilophosaurus didn't find it grouping there. So I think it's something different. I will say also, you're talking about two early Jurassic, relatively large theropods, and we mentioned the Triassic. There is something in the pipeline.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
Kings of the Triassic.
We are aware. We are aware. We're saving a King of the Triassic episode for that.
I'm not aware, so I'm looking forward to hearing about it. And anyway, my final choice, and this is more of a question than an answer because I don't know anything about the subject. Diplodocus is one of these animals that there have been so many species erected that have been synonymized with, different species within the genus Diplodocus, like Seismosaurus, for example. I think it's analogous to a lot of these, classic 1800s bone wars species like Allosaurus, or outside of that, like Mosasaurus, where things just kind of get rolled into it. And I think it's pretty interesting. And what I am curious about is, why is Seismosaurus not real? Why has that been synonymized with Diplodocus? If anyone knows about that.
I am not an expert on that, but I know some people who are working specifically on that and synonymizing some of those specimens. So
yeah,
give it a few months or a year, but I believe that's the main thing they're working on.
Do you have any information that might be illuminating?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh no, not on Seismosaurus.
Okay. Well, it is its own species of Diplodocus. I've heard it suggested that it should be like one of the more classic ones, but okay. Well, never mind.
We'll find out. Well, okay. Well, I'm glad that I'm unearthing something interesting, at least. I'm not being total noob about this, but yeah, those are my top three picks. I just big sauropod and two big theropods. Best I could do.
So, Andy, what are your picks?
So the first one that I picked was Razan Dragobe Sakalabe, which is this really cool, gigantic Notosuchian that lived in Madagascar during the Middle Jurassic. It was, I think, about 23 feet long. It weighed a
Whoa.
metric ton. And how this was kind of introduced to me that I really loved was that it was almost a picture perfect example of the island rule, where you had like dwarf dinosaurs, and then you had this giant Notosuchian that was preying on them, that had become the apex predator, kind of in the absence of theropods, but or at least large theropods. I think there are some theropod remains that were found alongside it. But it's really interesting because it actually displays a lot of theropod convergence, specifically with tyrannosaurs, where it has very similar like pachyodont teeth. So really good at osteophagy, just munching on tough stuff like bones, tendons. We don't
Captain
really know too
Crunch.
much about it, but it's really, really interesting. And I'm hoping that we get better fossils of it in the future. The second thing I picked because I thought it was cheating to pick Allosaurus anax or something. And we already talked about it, so I'm not going to go with that. But was Torvosaurus species. I'm using hacks that I found in the scientific literature. I don't have to say Torvosaurus tanneri, Torvosaurus gurnii. I can just say species. It's wonderful. And just because it's this really interesting dinosaur, I think there's a lot of work on that's going on too that's going to shake it up. And it was without a doubt one of the largest carnivores of the Jurassic. Really interesting. I think there's a lot of information or data suggesting that it was a more coastal animal. And I'm just very eager
Yeah.
for this data to actually be published and everything. It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
and well, the thing I love about the big three of the Morrison, Allosaurus, Torvosaurus, and Ceratosaurus, is that they're all so different from each other. Like in other systems where you have several giant predators living together, they're all like they're both tyrannosaurids or it's like three carcharodontosaurids or whatever. But in this case, they're like three animals that have each arrived on a different like style of being a predator, it looks like. I mean, we can't say much about niche partitioning, as much as tempting and as that would be to do so. But these all are differently built animals with different sized teeth, different shaped forelimbs. Um, and I find that very, very fascinating.
Yeah, and I think some of the work that I'm at least aware of, if I remember correctly, is going to kind of delve into that niche partitioning, and they actually had some really interesting findings. So that will be really fun. I don't want to talk about it too much because it's not my work. And honestly, and Torvosaurus has those super like short, powerful arms and
Yeah.
everything, closely related to Spinosaurus. So, both megalosauroids. So I think it's awesome. And the last one that I actually ended up choosing was Tiantrosaurus. I'm not going to try to pronounce the specific name. Small ankylosaur from China. I think its name means heavenly pool lizard. I probably should have chosen Spicamelus, but I love Tiantrosaurus. I love it for all the Jurassic Park references and everything. Because I think its specific name is actually the initials of all the actors in Jurassic Park, just kind of lumped together. And it's a really early ankylosaur. And part of when we were talking about like kings of the Jurassic, I was kind of thinking like, what better way to crown a king than to have something that survived into the Cretaceous and
Cool.
survived the Jurassic extinction
True.
and then diversified into this big group of herbivores. So that's why I
True.
chose that guy.
Nice. And I'd say so for my list, I have Allosaurus fragilis, which I'm going to leave to you guys to discuss
Yeah.
because basically for me it
We,
was
we
that
should talk about Allosaurus fragilis a little bit. But
yeah.
yeah, keep going.
To me, it's the quintessential Jurassic theropod. Like
Agreed.
everyone loves Allosaurus, even non-dinosaur people. That's still one of the ones that they're familiar with, and I feel like most people can like kind of recognize an Allosaurus skeleton. Like they'll look at that and they'll know that that's either an Allosaurus or at least something that's very different than from like a T-Rex. To me, like the crests are just very it's just such an iconic trait that I would have that as like the second most iconic theropod outside of T-Rex and
Yeah.
maybe Spinosaurus too. But anyways, yeah. So what do you guys want to say about Allosaurus fragilis?
So, well, it's the best known theropod dinosaur in the fossil record. So it's How much of that is just taphonomic is like that's a very important question to ask when asking why it's so common especially compared to its rivals in the Morrison Formation. But it is the most common. I think there's probably a reason for that. I think it is in some ways reflective of a very successful animal,
Mhm.
a very violent animal, but judging by all the pathologies, we have basically like every part of an Allosaurus has been found wounded in some way or another. Uh, which maybe that's only because we have so many of them, and all theropods were like that. But Allosaurus was definitely a scrapper. I find them to be very beautiful animals. I love the way that their head sweeps backward, like a very gentle, culminating in a crest, like not very ostentatious crest. I think they look great, and they're just a classic. And I also think that it's very cool that we have two species now that with Jematsoni, that people have been trying to get two species out of Allosaurus for like 150 years. And finally, they managed to pull that off with Jematsoni. And it looks like that one's definitely standing up to scrutiny. And the thing that's cool about that is that it looks like those Allosaurus fragilis and Allosaurus Jematsoni are chronologically separated, and that there are no confidently referred fragilis material from the salt wash and no confidently referred Jematsoni material from the brushy basing member. What I've noticed about being fascinated by giant allosaurs is that all of the Saurophaganax question mark quote unquote is not the only known giant allosaur from the Morris Formation. None of them are very good, but it's not the only one. All of them, including snacks, quote unquote, is from the upper reaches of the Morrison Formation. All like four or five of them, right?
Mhm.
And I suspect that that's a meaningful signal.
So it's definitely possible. I think a lot of the big material, kind of like you were talking about, is really fragmentary, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But I think there's generally been a hypothesis. The dishwasher is done. Um, Generally a hypothesis of Cope's rule, kind of an Allosaurus.
Mhm.
So kind of as time has gone on, they grow larger and larger.
Mhm.
So the larger specimens are kind of hypothesized to be the later ones, are
Right.
represent,
Right.
later.
And all of the largest known species of each sauropod from the Morrison are also from these same uppermost beds. At Cope's nipple over in Garden Park, that's where the Epanterius holotype, another giant allosaur,
Mhm.
and the semi-mythological Amphicelius, now known as Meropunosaurus, is from, along with Chimerosaurus supremus, the largest known species of Chimerosaurus.
Yeah.
So we're getting a rise in a rise what looks like a larger sauropods at the same time as we're getting larger allosaurs.
Hmm.
If this because Morrison biostratigraphy is not very good. Chronostratigraphy, excuse me, is not very good. Correlating the Morse formation has been very challenging. But if this pretty large assumption is correct and this is a meaningful signal, I think that might have interesting implications for how sauropods and allosaurs were interacting. If if
Yeah.
if prey size was driving predator size or predator size was driving prey size, very hard to
Like,
say with the very limited information we have.
Yeah, speaking of Morrison formation sauropods, I had Brachiosaurus as my second pick, which is probably one of the most iconic dinosaurs just of all time. Between that and Brontosaurus, which were synonymized for like a while, but recently Brontosaurus came back, which I'm happy about. Yeah, Brachiosaurus was a large sauropod from the Morrison, and wasn't there a recently found skull of
Yeah,
a
I believe it's at
Brachiosaurus?
Black Hills. I believe it's at
Yeah,
Black Hills, so
Yeah,
they need to get it to a museum, and then maybe someone can publish on it, or maybe they can work with someone who's cool with working with privately held fossils. But
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen images of it. It is
it is
interesting
cool.
compared to its relatives like Giraffatitan, which is a similar large sauropod, but coming from Africa.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and anyways, my third pick is like Jared, Dilophosaurus. I mean, it's just to me, being an Arizona native, to me that should have been the Arizona state dinosaur. I don't know why it's Sonorosaurus and not Dilophosaurus.
It's
But
Dinosaurus because some 7-year-old girl went to Congress and went, "Hey," the state Congress went, "Hey, we should have this be our state dinosaur," and they all went, "Oh, good, this is good press for everyone who votes yes for it, and we don't have to do anything for it."
still the
Not
wrong
not a
thing.
lot of decision making is going on in these state dinosaur selections, and usually just asking kids which one they think is the cooler
Yeah.
one.
But honestly, I think Dilophosaurus in real life was a cooler animal than in Jurassic Park. They got much longer, like 23 feet or so.
It's a grizzly
And
bear sized animal.
Yeah.
what?
It's a grizzly bear sized animal.
Yeah, these things were huge, especially during the time. And like what Jared was saying, I think it's really cool having early examples of these really large macropredatory dinosaurs in this case. In my personal line of work is sharks. I love the early examples. And while I don't have a ton to say on the dinosaur side of things, on the shark side of things in the Jurassic was a really cool time for shark evolution. But yeah,
Plus,
I do.
this transcends sharks and dinosaurs and whatnot. This interest in basal taxa, because they're the most, in my opinion, the most phylogenetically useful taxa. Because what really matters in a phylogenetic analysis is derived traits, and to understand what trait is derived, you have to have these plesiomorphic primitive traits nailed down first. And to do that, you have to find these basal taxa, and that just makes it so exciting.
What does Tyrannosaurus Rex tell us? It tells us that Tyrannosaurs got really big. What does a really small one like Guanlong tell us? A whole lot about their early evolution.
Mhm.
Yes.
T-Rex tells us that it was cool, Zeke.
There you
That's
go.
all I need to know.
Yeah, that's
I do also want to clarify when we're talking about Dilophosaurus getting up to like 20 feet long and being the size of a grizzly bear. We're not saying grizzly bears could get 20 feet long. We're just saying grizzly bears are heavier built than Dilophosaurus, and they are probably about comparable in
and
size and mass.
dinosaurs have giant tails that inflate their length
Yeah.
a lot. So
Just want to make sure we're clear on that.
20-foot grizzly bear. I believe. I've seen some crazy stuff up in Alaska, dude.
That would be my nightmare.
so what do we think the top three should be for the land animals of the Jurassic? I think Allosaurus fragilis should for sure be one of the three.
I will throw Allosaurus up there as much as I like Sinraptor and Ursinraptor and all those.
I will vote for Allosaurus species.
Yeah.
For obvious
Allosaurus
reasons.
SP. Allosaurus.
I do think
Serious
either
Allosaurus, all of the species as a genus.
I do think when
That's
we're
fair.
looking at this under Kings of the Jurassic, I do think Dilophosaurus or Cryolophosaurus should really be in there as large, early to, I think now Cryolophosaurus might be middle Jurassic theropods that are really kind of setting the stage for what you expect down the line.
Yeah, I would also put in Dilophosaurus because it's a much earlier time than when we have all of these really well advanced theropods.
When you're talking about Allosaurus versus Dilophosaurus, you're separated by about 50 million years. There's a lot of time there.
Right.
And honestly,
what about a sauropod? I mean, I don't think none of us picked whatever the biggest sauropod is.
Well, I want to hear what Andy was going to say first on theropods.
thank you.
Yeah.
All I was going to say was that I find it's really appropriate that Dilophosaurus makes it through because it kind of has the crown already built in.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, but I almost picked Guanlong just for that.
I also almost picked Guanlong.
That'd be a good one.
All right, so we have Allosaurus species, we have Dilophosaurus. What is going to be our third one?
I think it's got to be Chimerissaurus or Brachiosaurus out of what we've listed here.
I'd go with Brachiosaurus.
Yeah.
It's very regal. Of the sauropods, it's the most regal, I think.
I honestly would pick Chimerissaurus over that, but I respect the choice of Brachiosaurus as well.
Yeah. I think being that represented, I think I will say I think there might be one other dinosaur that's better represented, Protoceratops, but that's Cretaceous, so it doesn't matter to us right now.
Right. Mhm.
Brachiosaurus.
Yeah, no, that'd be another good one.
I
Well,
think
Pterosaurus is split up
Chimerissaurus.
on like 12 species, so.
True.
Wait, which one?
Psittacosaurus. It's
Okay.
Cretaceous, early Ceratopsian. That
Yeah,
doesn't have a crest yet.
Yeah, you guys like cut out when you said it, so I was just like, hello.
I can go Brachiosaurus.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
good.
Awesome. My
I mean,
entire
I
list
think we're
made it.
split, but I think that's 3 and 2.
Yeah.
Yep. So we
Andy and
got
I, the
Allosaurus,
dissenters.
Dilophosaurus, and Brachiosaurus, which moves us on to the sea. So, Jared, you're going to start us off because you're a sea person, just like me.
I'm a Cretaceous sea person, but I had more ideas with the Jurassic one at least. So, I'm trying to remember off. I remember two of them. I don't remember what my third one was. Oh, yes, I do remember. Okay, so starting off, this is fresh in my mind because of that pliosaurus that was discovered in the UK not too long ago. And I mean, I don't know. You guys are all paleontologists, and if you go to a collection and you see like a non-mounted specimen in a back room of just like, in my experience, mosasaurs, in other people's experience, large theropod skulls, whatever. These, there's nothing to say, but they just have aura. Like I don't know how else to describe it. A huge predator. When you walk up to a complete skull, it's pretty soul touching. And Pliosaurus was able to do that through a screen to me. I mean, that discovery was pretty incredible. And the fact is, I like pliosaurs in general. I think of them as like the Pac-Men of the sea because they're basically just head flippers. And that's why I ended up choosing two. I chose Pliosaurus and Liopleurodon because I think Pliosaurus got a little bit bigger, if I remember correctly, but they're both two famous taxa that should definitely at least be suggested. And then outside of that, I had to go with the fish. And regarding fish, why not the biggest bony fish of all time? And that is Leedsichthys. So Leedsichthys was a good choice for me to go with as well.
Yeah, I also chose Pliosaurus. If you remember in what was it, the early 2010s, the Predator X documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that was childhood, but Pliosaurus funkii is Predator X.
Oh,
So yeah, so those are one of the largest pliosaurs of all time. Um, if you've ever seen a pliosaur tooth, even though these animals weren't like the Liopleurodon you see in Walking with Dinosaurs, that at least everyone here has seen except Jared, um, their skulls are still massive and their teeth are really long. They're really densely rooted. They have these really cool striations on them, and they're just bone-crushing teeth.
I've
They're
seen
insane.
I've seen Dr. Dean Lomax post some just random pics of these Liopleurodon teeth falling out of the UK, and they're bigger than T-Rex teeth. Like it's genuine. Like
Yeah.
I can't think of a single animal that has bigger teeth than Liopleurodon apart from Leviathan. Like honestly,
Which is very funny too.
yes, yeah, true.
Yeah.
They don't even.
I will say, can you expand a little bit on one of the things that it might have been eating in Leedsichthys? Because you just kind of mentioned it real brief.
Wasn't it a plankton feeder, Leedsichthys?
Yeah, it was a filter feeder and it was just this really large bony fish. And unfortunately, we have fossils of gill rakers, which is how we know it was filter feeding. That's what they used to pull them out. But most of the fossils are pretty partial, so
Yeah, it's one of those like half the reason I choose Leedsichthys too is just basically like Jurassic Bonerichthyes, which it's up my wheelhouse. So I'm like, babe, welcome back, Leedsichthys. Um, so
Nice. Yeah, I had Pliosaurus for one of my picks. My other pick was Sphenodus longidens, which is my contribution for the shark side of things in the Jurassic, because when if we go back into the Triassic, the true sharks were around, but they weren't really like what we see today. We didn't have these crown groups of sharks at that time. So the Jurassic was really pivotal because multiple of those crown orders of sharks that are alive right now, um, multiple of those became predominant within the Jurassic. Some of them just came in like at the tail end and kind of like were like very small. They weren't super diverse or anything like that. But there was others that were pretty diverse. That they were still mostly like overshadowed by things like hybodonts, which were also present in the Triassic. And the hybodonts were on the shark side of things, even though they're not true sharks, they're a relative of sharks. They're sister to both the sharks and the rays, the hybodonts. They were around in the Triassic in greater frequencies, but you start seeing that shift a little bit in the Jurassic, especially towards the end of it. But anyways, um, Sphenodus longidens was arguably a hexanchoform, which is a cow shark. That's the Capetta interpretation that I personally agree with. But it was a hexanchoform that had these really long, thin, needle-like teeth with a lingually protruded tooth base, which these things were basically like the first macropredatory shark, kind of like filling in a mackerel shark type of niche. But this was a cow shark doing that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It grows into what I was about to ask of. 'Cause we were discussing this a little bit with in our previous episode because, like in the Cretaceous, you see big sharks appearing when there's this conspicuous gap of big marine reptiles, and so by that reason, you trace it back into the Jurassic. In the Jurassic, there was no conspicuous gap of big marine reptiles as the period continued. So, were there any large sharks, like comparable to Cretoxyrhina or Cretotus or something, in the Jurassic, or were they mostly, lower in the trophic level?
So Sphenodus longidens would have been one of the biggest, and other cow sharks got pretty big too. But you're not really seeing anything that is filling a niche of like Cretoxyrhina. So Sphenodus would get teeth up to like 44 millimeters long. So they were pretty decently sized teeth. But they weren't, you wouldn't see something that was like an active, fast swimming macro predator that was like 20 plus feet long, like Cretoxyrhina was. You'd
Yeah,
see some big cow sharks like Notodenodon, for example, in the Jurassic, some other Jurassic cow shark taxa, but there wasn't anything, yeah, that was like that. And probably because of the reasons you said, there's such a predominance on these large marine reptiles. Were there any bony fish that were like equivalent to like Zipactinus in the Jurassic? Does
I don't
anyone
know. I don't know.
Because I don't think so. I think marine reptiles really just took the cake in the Jurassic.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
interesting. I'm sure there's some Jurassic fish researcher right now who's screaming at their screen.
yeah, but they can let us know in the comments. But yeah,
Yes.
my
Please
third
do.
pick was a what?
Oh, I said please do. Please criticize us as much as you want in the comments.
Yeah, my third pick was another marine reptile. It is Plesiosuchus, which is a really cool animal because this was a crocodiliform that was fully adapted to a pelagic aquatic environment. It's something that you would love, Jared, because these basically were mosasaurs before mosasaurs, but they were off the line of crocodilians rather than monitor lizards.
Yeah, the Latisuchians are really interesting, and there's a good fossil record of them. I think if
They're
I
really diverse too.
say what?
They're really diverse too. Like there's a bunch of genera,
Yeah,
and in some like assemblages, they're the biggest predator in the environment. There's like, 25, 30 footers.
I think if I wasn't born in Texas, if I was living in the UK, they would have ended up being my like in a parallel universe. They'd be my set of mosasaurs because yeah, they're like the Jurassic's response to mosasaurs.
Yeah.
British Jared.
Pretty.
Yeah, what are your picks, Cole?
Okay, so pick number one, Temnodontosaurus. Also going to use the spa on that one because they're all big. Temnodontosaurus is an ichthyosaur, and As we know, ichthyosaurs were the nice dolphin ones that were very friendly and would have been exactly like whales because that's the general shape they were, and behavior follows shape, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that I think that that stereotype of ichthyosaurs is very, very inaccurate. And looking at Temnodontosaurus, it is like the typical Temnodontosaurus specimen for historically it's a bit of a wastebasket taxon. A lot of stuff got synonymized. But there's like 7 species currently standing. The average one is like the size of an orca, and they're these long. They're not some of the later groups of tunosaurs that have like the very long front very very long elongated front forelimbs compared to hind limbs, but they are very swordfish shaped. They're very very thin, huge tail flukes. Um, and very, very like slender. Probably would have been a very, very fast animal. And They're enormous teeth. The biggest Hemodontosaurus skull, besides the Rutland sea dragon, because it's not described yet, is 6'2". There would have been, I think, are very serious contenders for the most formidable predator in these early, especially the early Jurassic oceans when they lived, and we don't have pliosaurs at the time. And as we know, the tail of the pliosaurs is the tail of the eternal downsizing, where they're always smaller than they get hyped up to be. But Temnodontosaurus, we've got from 3 different species: Platodon, the Eurocephalus, and there's another one. They get up to 10 meters, so 33 feet. And the Rutland Sea Dragon, which Dean Lomax is currently working on, a brand new complete skeleton that's the biggest one ever found, pushing 11 to 12 meters, is I think that would have been a very, very dangerous, huge, giant, draconic predator.
So I actually also put Temnodontosaurus in here, and I want to
Mhm.
just there's a Triassic fossil of an ichthyosaur, Guizhou ichthyosaurus,
Mhm.
which it's estimated to have been about 15 to 18 feet long. So what is that,
Yep.
5 to 6 meters or so? And it
Mhm.
seemingly died trying to eat something that was about 3 to 4 meters long. So
Yeah.
just absolutely ravenous
Well,
appetites.
and the fun part is that if you're aware of the tooth guild system they use to classify marine reptiles, this is the cut guild, the smash guild, the pierce guild. Um, Guizhou ichthyosaurus is a little ichthyosaur trending towards like very kind of general dentition, but trending towards pierce guild. So by teeth doesn't look like it's going after huge prey. But here we have it doing something that's very macroraptorial. It had ripped the head off of a thalattosaur and in a very Zipactinus fashion died right after it ingested it.
Yeah.
So there goes your whole like nice whale like vibes from these guys. Of course, that's a Triassic ichthyosaur.
Yeah.
It doesn't have quite. It's still very elongate. It's a Shastosaurid. Um, it's but Temnodontosaurus, they've been found with baby ichthyosaurs, not pregnant, not eaten, and not the other time way we find baby ichthyosaurs and ichthyosaur stomachs pregnant. That it definitely eaten them. Uh, so there's another Temnodontosaurus called Eurocephalus, which has a very reduced skull. It's very like it's a very big animal still, but the skull's a lot smaller, and it has these huge like almost prognathodon type. It's like the prognathodon of Temnodontosaur species. It's got like a very blunt, shortened skull, very massive, like robust dentary, and like very huge, like strong, massive, round teeth.
Yeah.
So,
Ichthyosaurs in general, like they get points for diversity. There used to be what was considered a species of globidins. And
mhm.
for those of you who are listening, globidins, the shell crushing mosasaur. And they used to call it Globidins timorensis from Indonesia until it was looked at and I was like, oh, pause. This is a Triassic ichthyosaur. It just has
Yeah,
globidins like
yeah,
teeth.
it was an amphilosaur.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Temnodontosaurus is my first pick.
I'll cover Andy's options since he had a bounce.
Awesome.
So Ichthyosaurus communis is was really, after kind of Mosasaurus was the first complete skeleton of a giant dead extinct reptile known to science, and it was the thing that got people to start asking questions about, are there animals that were alive in the past but are alive no longer? All the lore with Mary Anning and all the fossils she collected. She obviously collected the first Ichthyosaurus communis specimens. Um, they're very common. You can find them for sale at every fossil show. Full, beautiful, articulated specimens. They're all over the Jurassic coast. So points for commonality in the same way that we gave Chimerisauros points. And then my third pick was another marine croc, Maximus, which is the biggest known of the thalattosuchians, which I don't know basically anything about them besides that they're diverse and big and stuff. So I'll let Jared's words on them speak in place of them. So there we go. Those are my picks.
Awesome.
Cool. So I guess I'll just chime in now with Andy since I can talk. Since Andy had to go, make sure I'm on the right person's things. Oh, ocean. I'm on the wrong section. I'm on the freshwater stuff. He also, though, did share one of his picks with mine, which is Plesiosaurus, the classic plesiosaur, originally found by Mary Anning in the 1800s, and really just showed like, hey, these marine reptiles are getting really weird. She also found Ichthyosaurus, so that would also be there. For what I've seen, Andy also picked Machimosaurus, so similar, looking at these big marine crocodilians that were, from what I know, still probably cold-blooded, whereas a lot of reptiles that move back to marine ecosystems seem to be warm-blooded. So they were doing something
Ichthyosaurus definitely warm-blooded.
Maybe a little different.
Yeah.
But still really neat.
And unarmored too. They didn't have armor. The big ones didn't.
Yeah.
They lost their back armor.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. Leatherbacks are big and they don't have,
it's leatherback, not exactly. And then he also just picked Hybotus, which, as we were talking about earlier with sharks, there's a lot of variety in sharks.
Yeah. Hybotus, I will say, has been somewhat of a waste bucket taxa for a long time. Like people in the past, they would just lump basically any hybodont that they would find as a Hybotus species. So like now if you go under like shark references or something, you just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and it's just Hybotus names. And this is even when you filter to valid. For those that don't know, sharkreferences.com, they have a reference sheet for every valid and every described chondrichthyan name practically. Granted, they obviously missed some. Obviously, some stuff is not super up to date, but it's still a good resource. But anyways, Hybotus shrank considerably since all of this stuff has been placed into it, and there's still a lot of work that's most likely going to need to be done to revise it further.
There's a lot of stuff like that in the fossil record.
Yeah.
And even potentially moving on to my picks now, and the one that I share with Andy with Plesiosaurus, that could even be one because seemingly it has a fairly large range from kind of the middle of the early Jurassic into the middle Jurassic. That could be incorrect. That could be multiple taxa knocking about there. But when you're thinking about a plesiosaur, this is what you're thinking about with the long neck that's, swimming through the water, catching fish and things.
Yeah. But not as long as like an Elasmosaurus.
Elasmosaurus, yeah.
Fun.
Which is one of the more derived plesiosaurs. But
all the Jurassic plesiosaurs are short, like medium-necked plesiosaurs.
There's the medium-necked ones in the Jurassic, then there's the very short-necked ones like Leopleurodon and such, yeah. And I know there's a lot of taxonomic ideas bouncing around there as well, but that's not something I'm aware of. Anyway, we also talked about my other pick being Temnodontosaurus, and so my final pick then is Ophthalmosaurus, which is an ichthyosaur. However, it's really well known and had absolutely giant eyes. Seemingly, it was diving pretty deep and going after fish and squid and those kinds of things. And there are a few of these, I believe, which actually have been caught pregnant. And, well, a lot of people have gone, oh, well, they were giving birth. It might have been more of a, well, it died. And then as all the rock came down on top of it, it kind of squished the baby out. But really interesting to understand their kind of biology, what they're doing. So, yeah, Ophthalmosaurus is another great one.
Yeah, real quick on Temnodontosaurus. The biggest eyes known of any vertebrate, Temnodontosaurus. Which Ophthalmosaurus has proportionally larger eyes, but it's a
Yeah.
smaller animal. Although not as
Yeah.
small as you think. The
Oh no,
Ophthalmosaurus was like a 20-foot animal, like a
yeah,
15 to 20 foot.
you're not. People like to go, oh well, it's dolphin sized or whatever.
Yeah,
But, thinking maybe it's 6 to 10 feet. It's like no, it's like bottlenose dolphin sized, and maybe even a little bit bulkier than that on top of it.
yeah,
So it's a pretty dang large animal.
yeah. They also have ophthalmosaurids have evidence of diving pathologies.
Yeah.
Um, I work for Dr. Martin Sander, the ichthyosaur specialist in Germany, most on Triassic stuff. But I mentioned this to him, and he kind of was not super on board with the diving hypothesis on ophthalmosaurs. So maybe more to come on that later. But
How, how,
I think it's cool. Sorry,
how big were their eyes? Like, what can you compare them to?
Temnodontosaurus soccer ball.
Holy cow. Yeah, it's probably bigger than a T-Rex then too. Because I mean,
Yeah,
T-Rex had big eyes. I don't think they were soccer ball sized.
yeah.
Not quite.
So what
That
do we
that's
think? What?
I was just gonna say that's rivaling the largest eyes known from like the giant squid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy. So what do we think the top three for oceans would be?
We have to have an ichthyosaur. We have to have a plesiosaur.
And
I
we gotta have
think
a shark.
I think Plesiosaurus should be the one that's picked because it was at least under
Mm,
current taxonomic positions around for a long time.
sure.
As
Yeah.
a group, the long-necked plesiosaurs succeeded longer than short-necked plesiosaurs. And also, it's literally where their name comes from.
But not big. They weren't the kings. They would have been ate by a pliosaurus. I'm just saying.
Yeah, sure, they would have been eaten, but you know what? Guess
What?
who died out first?
Fair, fair, fair.
They're like the older runt son of the Jurassic, but I think Pliosaurus would be the king.
I think so too, baby.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I might even get to work on a pliosaur dig at some point in the next couple weeks.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm pretty biased.
But I
Well,
think
I think that so to me, the most beautiful marine reptile of all time are the pliosaurs, particularly the yeah, it's not the mosasaurs, it's the pliosaurs.
Beautiful.
Particularly
What?
what?
Not an elasmosaurs are like these
I
very.
think pliosaurs are kind of ugly, honestly.
They're
Like,
so.
like I think they're awesome, but beautiful is not the word I'd use on a
I think
pliosaur.
the most beautiful marine reptile is the Galapagos iguana.
There we go. Sea snake.
Well, at least the fossils of pliosaurs, like the
They have
skulls are just
aura.
so beautiful.
Yeah,
What?
they have aura. It's like when you walk up to a big Tylosaurus skull and you're just like,
Yeah.
whoa. The same.
Like it just commands a presence, and those things were the kings of the Jurassic oceans. Those, so I think as far as the plesiosaur realm, I think that Pliosaurus should be the
And
plesiosaur.
I think Pliosaurus deserves the reputation that Liopleurodon earned. Like the
Yeah.
reputation Liopleurodon has, I think should be with Pliosaurus, personally.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to
Yeah.
that either.
Yeah.
So we can have Pliosaurus as a king.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
do think we should go with Temnodontosaurus then as the
Yeah.
ichthyosaur though,
I
which I think
agree.
is
I'm
also
fine with
really
that.
interesting because right around then you're getting the in the early Jurassic, I think you're starting to see I think it's the Romalosaurs, which are
Mhm.
one of these plesiosaur groups that kind of develop into the
Yeah. They are basal
pliosaurs.
pliosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah. But you still have really big ichthyosaurs like Temnodontosaurus, so it's kind of
Right.
the king before the pliosaurs take over.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Hold over from the Triassic a little bit, even though they're part of the Pelvians and uh, really like none of the giant Triassic guys are part of the Pelvians. There's only a couple known part of the Pelvian taxa from the Triassic. They're all like victims of of the big Shastosaurus.
Yeah. So we have Pliosaurus, we have Temnodontosaurus, and I think that if we were to do a shark, I do think that Spinotus makes the cut because that's basically just a glimpse into what sharks
Yeah, origination of modern shark diversity.
Well, and it's better because it's more specific than just going, it's some kind of hybotus.
Bode, yeah.
Yeah. It's a very cool thing too because Spinotus makes it all the way into the Paleocene.
Oh,
So
what?
that's like a crazy range.
That
It's a
is
They
crazy.
don't
king.
look very different. Yeah, the some of the Paleocene ones are really large, beefy teeth. So it's a cool animal.
And that just serves the hypothesis of the minute you don't have big marine reptiles, sharks just boom. They get big. So that's cool. More
Yeah.
data.
Awesome. So we have Pliosaurus, Temnodontosaurus, and Spinotus. So let's
Unranked,
do
unranked, unranked. Because if we're gonna
yeah.
go Pliosaurus versus Temnodontosaurus, I'm gonna make a case. But if not, then if those are just like the three unranked selections, then
Like in no particular
forget it.
order,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll let the audience rank them.
sure.
All
Yeah,
right,
go
so
for
our
it.
next section is going to be air. Let's see who the kings of the air were in the Jurassic. You want to go first, Jared?
Yes, thank you. I'll go first. I am so sorely lacking in this area, so my best answer is really just Archaeopteryx, and that almost needs no introduction. But I am going to bring a question in to anybody who might know more about this. With Archaeopteryx, is it still considered that they were just gliders, or is it thought that they could achieve true flight?
Unmute myself there. So I know there were some studies that like micro CT scanned the slabs that they're in and were able to reconstruct the bone diameters and such, and found, yeah, it could get up in the air, probably about as well as like a chicken or a turkey, so they're not flying long distances, but
But
that's still getting in the air.
they're powering their flight.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like, and that's the important thing, right? But you're also needing to think about where they were living. This is all an archipelago during the Jurassic in Germany with the Solnhofen limestone where they're found.
Mhm.
So small islands, you're essentially just occupying the niche of small predatory animal that eats whatever it finds and also can try and escape whenever something larger tries to find it. 'Cause there are some larger theropods from other parts of the archipelago, not necessarily directly where Archaeopteryx has been found. And then, occasionally they just got washed out to sea and sank down to the bottom of these lagoons that were hypersaline and very low oxygen and got preserved really nicely.
Awesome.
Archaeopteryx is pretty cool. I had them on my list as well. And one of the claim to fames on Archaeopteryx is its link between dinosaurs and now what we know of as avian dinosaurs or birds. Because the famous specimen that I don't think you can go into a museum that does not have a cast of that specimen, but basically a
Or
fake
one.
Archaeopteryx from Germany that has the impressions of the feathers all around it. At the time, that was groundbreaking stuff because here you have this thing that looks like a dinosaur that has
Literally,
teeth.
because it was coming from a quarry. It was
Yeah.
groundbreaking.
Well, and that's the Berlin specimen. I know when I went to the Fukui Museum in Japan, they have the slab that you normally see, and then they also had the counter slab, which was really cool to see.
Oh, cool.
Because essentially you're getting these really fine laminated layers, and so you kind of crack it open, and you have to do a little bit of prep work, but it presents it very nicely.
the
Yeah.
way the way I like to think about Archaeopteryx, it's like the Mona Lisa of paleontology. Like to see the Berlin specimen, and I mean the Chicago Field Museum recently got a very nice Archaeopteryx, which I'm sure they probably paid a very pretty penny for from some German collector. And yeah, it's as if like the Chicago Institute of Art got the Mona Lisa. Like it's that much of a famous, historically relevant taxon.
Mhm.
I would say it probably wasn't the museum that actually paid a pretty penny for it. It was probably their donors.
True, true. Yeah, there you go. If we want to split hairs, yeah,
There's not that many millions of dollars in paleontology.
Yeah.
true, true.
Yeah, it's really cool because like it has these bird-like features and then at the time they're looking at it and it was a dinosaur to them. It had, the teeth and the structure of it. It was just very much like a cross between two worlds that people didn't really think of. Like they don't think of it as how we think of dinosaur and bird evolution now. We kind of take that for granted. And like just now, I feel like it's getting appropriate where like you can point to a pigeon and say, look at the dinosaur, and then people like understand you and think you're cool. But back in the day, it wasn't like that.
Thinking.
But
Yeah.
The nerd.
yeah, they'll think you're a nerd, but that's about it.
Yeah, true, true.
Yeah,
And then the
did
counter side of that is people who like point out what was the last surviving dinosaur? Actually, it's a chicken. So maybe not always cool, but not the word, not maybe not the word I'd use, but
I will say, I do think it's funny that Archaeopteryx might not be Archaeopteryx in that kind of like we were talking about with Saurophaganax, where it was named from partial material. Initially, it was named from a single feather that was
uh-oh.
found in the Solnhofen limestone. And then they found the really
Right.
nice fossils, and that's
See,
seemingly all they were finding. And so
that
a
is a
lot of these
scenario.
fossils from the Solnhofen were just assigned to be Archaeopteryx, and now they're starting to find there's multiple
Yeah.
species of feathered dinosaur around there.
didn't they
That
have
is a
to break?
that is a scenario when erecting a neotype would be appropriate
They
and
Yeah.
did, yeah.
not a bucket full of bones with a famous name.
Yeah, because didn't they have to break a lot of conventions in order to keep Archaeopteryx, especially with the species name, with lithographica?
Lithographica.
I think I think that these old historically relevant names, I think there should be a lot of arm twisting and teeth pulling if needed to keep them.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
I think that like these historically significant names that are just pivotal to early paleontology, they're a treasure
Mhm.
of their own, and we need to do everything we can to keep them. So, yeah, I agree.
And we do
Well,
believe that it's a very early true bird, correct?
it
No,
depends on your definition of bird. And I will stand by Archaeopteryx is not a bird because it does
yeah.
not have a pygostyle,
Yeah,
which
it's an
is
avialin, not an avian.
yeah, I stand by the pygostylia definition of bird where it
Mhm.
has a series of fused vertebrae at the end of the tail that let it make a full fan of feathers.
Mhm.
Archaeopteryx, because it still had the long tail, it would have had a V at the very tip of its tail. So I would not classify that as a bird. I would classify it maybe as a stem bird, but
Mhm.
not a bird. So, but again,
A
that's all
birdoid.
definitions. You could,
A birdiform.
yeah, yeah, basically,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. All right, so what other picks do we have from for the air?
Did somebody pick Yi?
Yeah, looking through the doc, Andy picked Yi-Chi, which is ironic
Okay.
because I also picked Epidepteryx hui, which
Mhm.
they're very similar. They're Scansoriopterygiids, which is a whole other thing with taxonomy and naming things. But what you're essentially getting is the bat version of a dinosaur, where they had very long fingers that would have supported a membrane. In Yi-Chi, we actually have a cartilaginous rod extending off of the elbow, which would have helped support that membrane. Um, and there's a
Yeah,
few of these. I think only Yi-Chi and Ambomopteryx actually have the membrane preserved,
mhm.
but there's a few
And
of them, and they could at least glide.
and these things are not related to birds at all. I mean, like they're not on the bird line. They're Solorosaurs, obviously, but they're not they're 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 proof. They're this very interesting piece of dinosaur diversity that's been all this has come out in the last like 10 years. That di flight evolved in Dinosauria at least 3 times.
So this is
Yeah.
early experimentation with flight,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least gliding. Because I think there's
Yeah.
been some biomechanics stuff that's like, well, they weren't flying, but they were at least gliding.
Mhm.
But I do think there's going to be some stuff there talking about them not being birds where they're going to pop out probably close to the oviraptorans, is
Mhm.
my understanding based on what I've heard. And there's multiple groups working on this, and there's even been some published stuff supporting that already. So that's kind of what I'm expecting.
Awesome. What were the other picks of you and Andy?
Sorry, I had to scroll to the right thing. He also picked Tenokasma, which is a pterosaur, which would have been filter feeding essentially.
Mhm.
I believe it's that one, where it has many, many teeth that would be able to form a sieve, and it's normally presented as sometimes presented as this kind of pinkish animal, because the idea is, well, if it's living kind of like a flamingo, which turned pink because they're eating all of these krill and getting the starts with an A, whatever the chemical is, and these other and other carotenoids as well, which turn them orange. Um, Essentially, they could hypothetically be orange to pinkish colored, but likely,
Nice.
flying around, going to places where there's a lot of brine shrimp, and then just sucking up those essentially. Um,
Shrimp
Really interesting
sucker.
animals. There's a whole group of the Tenochasmatids that seemingly did
Yeah.
similar things.
The most famous one is the Cretaceous pterodactyl.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Um, he also picked Enurognathus, which I think is a great one. I believe it's also from the Solnhofen, but it's not as well preserved as some of the Enurognathids coming from China. But when you're thinking about, your birds that are out at night that aren't owls, so when I'm talking about that, I mean things like nighthawks and nightjars, which fly around on the wing with really wide mouths and catch bugs. That's what these things were doing. As far as we can tell, really wide mouths. They even had little, they might be feathers, they might not be feathers, but pycnofibers, which are similar fuzzy covering to feathers that pterosaurs had. But some of those pycnofibers are kind of sticking out from the mouth, which we see in feathers of modern day nightjars and stuff. So when they touch the bug, they know, oh, it's right there.
Mhm.
So really, again, another really interesting group of animals there. So that's
Yeah.
Andes. Mine, I went with Volaticotherium antiquum, which is a mammal that was gliding in the Middle Jurassic, which I just thought, hey, that should probably be tossed in just to show, hey,
Mentioned,
there's
yeah.
not just other things going around in the air. Epideptrix, which I mentioned, it's kind of like Yichi, one of these Scansoriopterygiids. And then I also picked Archocritus covalii. Sorry, I was not practicing this name beforehand, but it's an insect. And the reason I picked this insect is it has this really long proboscis that helps to show it was probably pollinating flowers, or at least things close to flowers, because the flowering plants and angiosperms had to evolve out of the gymnosperm somewhere. And it seems like it may have been kind of at this transition where it was pollinating gymnosperms and then flowering plants started to develop more and more, which I think is really important for understanding the Jurassic and then our modern day ecosystems as far as insect pollinators.
Definitely.
Didn't angiosperms show up in the fossil record in the early Cretaceous?
We are getting more and more fossil evidence that they were in the Jurassic.
Oh,
They were in
wow.
the Triassic. Like they show up in pollen cores from the Triassic. They don't
It's,
diversify until the early Cretaceous,
yeah, it,
is
it
is what happened.
the Triassic part I think is still a little contentious as
Gotcha.
what
Okay.
counts as a true angiosperm,
Right.
but
And
they're
it's
at
pollen
least,
cores, not body
it's
fossils.
not body fossils. If you found a body fossil of a fruit, you could say it, but you're at least getting towards that line. And by the middle Jurassic, we have what are almost for
Right.
sure fruits.
So it's kind of
Mhm.
like grasses, how they were around for millions and millions and millions of years, but never became
Yeah.
an ecosystem type until later in the
The
Cenozoic.
Miocene. Yeah.
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 Hmm. So my list, I have Pterodactylus, which is so usually when people say anything relating to pterosaurs, they call them pterodactyls. I think that they mostly talk about Pteranodon, but Pterodactylus is the most similar name to that. So I
Mhm.
could see that being as like a side note for something like being iconic within the Jurassic. But these were small. They were like a 3.5 foot wingspan, something like that. So not really the most impressive animal at the time. Uh, it was the first named and described pterosaur as like a true flying animal, which is pretty cool. My other pick was Deark, which is the largest Jurassic pterosaur that was alive, and these things had between I think 2.2 and 3.8 meters for wingspan, which is no, like nothing in comparison to what we see in the Cretaceous. But in the
Yeah,
Jurassic,
I think it's jerk.
what?
Jerk. It's
It
pronounced
could
Yeah,
be.
jerk.
this
I don't
it's
know.
a
Terrible.
Scottish
Yeah.
pronunciation, so
Yeah.
it's not as it reads.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, they were what's it called? Rampharanchids.
Mhm.
So they're the
Short
largest
tail
of that
or
as
long tail, excuse me.
what?
Long tail, excuse me.
Yeah, so they're the largest described one of those, except apparently there are fragmentary remains of a Rhamphorhynchus that was at around that size, maybe even a tiny bit larger.
Yeah, Hone and McDavid published that paper like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Like it just came out. So and like it's comparable in size. So I
Yeah,
think sticking
about
with
6 feet.
and when we're looking at Rhamphorhynchus specifically, again, Solnhofen limestone, we keep coming back to that. There's dozens of specimens of Rhamphorhynchus. It is the only large one, whereas the only specimen we have of Jark is the big one. So I think
Mhm.
it's fair to give it to Jark over Rhamphorhynchus.
Yeah. And then my other one was Archaeopteryx, which we've already talked on. So Cole, what are your picks?
My pick is Archaeopteryx, Yichi, and I'm going to go with Dimorphodon as being my only unique contribution because it's pretty. Looks like a puffin. They weren't disgusting monsters like they were portrayed in Jurassic World. They were little puffin-sized, puffin-shaped animals that lived in the early Jurassic, and they're among the probably the first known pterosaur that's got a good pterosaurs around in the Triassic, but the first pterosaur that has a like a pretty good fossil record, and we have an understanding what the animal was actually like.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So what are we thinking for the list? I feel like since almost everyone has said Archaeopteryx, I feel like that
Number
is
one, easy.
I mean, I'll be fair, I didn't pick it specifically because I knew everyone
Yeah.
else was going to. So
Mhm.
yeah. So I think it's fair to have Archaeopteryx in there. What do we think for the other ones though?
I do think I'm going to defend picking the insect, picking Archocritus, or you could really just put any flying pollinating insect. I just chose
Oh,
that one because it was useful and I had a good example of it, and it's kind of unique.
yep.
I,
Then number two. How about the Tina Casman for? Do we want to do the Tina Casman, or do we want to do Rhamphorhynchus Gier for number three?
I almost think that Pterodactylus might be better because Pterodactylus is closer to what survived through that extinction. Although on that note, so is
Tina
Tinochasma.
Cat. Yeah.
Plus, I don't like the name Jerk, so
I like the long-tailed pterosaurs. I think they're neat. I wish they had more going for them.
Yeah, well,
Diversity
unfortunately they
wise.
died. So,
Yeah.
which there was some good stuff last year about, that whole evolutionary sequence, but
Yeah, because it turns out that like long-tailed pterosaur is not a real. It's paraphyletic.
it's a grade, not a clade.
Right. Right. And it's a useful one. It's a useful grade to use when discussing things generally.
Yeah,
In the same way that prosauropod and iguanodont is.
yeah,
Mm.
hmm.
exactly.
Yeah, I
But
think literally last episode, didn't we have a long discussion about how much we dislike pterosaurs?
yeah.
And we had an argument, and I was the one that was supporting the Pteranodon not being moved to F tier for some reason.
Oh yeah, yeah. Me and Ben were gunning for an F tier. Yeah, I remember that. That was funny.
So we have Archaeopteryx, we have the flying insect thing, and what was the third one?
Flying insect thing. And let's go Tina Casmus.
Tinochasma is good.
It's
All
big.
right, sounds good. So that
It's
leaves us
orange.
with Freshwater for the Kings of the Jurassic.
Orange pterosaur energy.
Yeah. Freshwater, who wants to kick us off? Anyone?
You know what? I can kick us
Yeah.
off this one. All right. So for freshwater, my first pick is Priohybotus ehrenbergi, and I've actually had a tooth of one of these before from Tunisia, the place where they filmed Tatooine and Star Wars. It was pretty cool. But so Priohybotus, it's a hybodont, and one of the things that happened with hybodonts is as sharks progressively started dominating the marine realm, the freshwater wound up becoming a refuge for hybodonts, specifically in the Cretaceous. But you do see freshwater hybodonts earlier than that too, as well. So by the end of the Cretaceous, hybodonts mostly have seeked these freshwater niches, and they're rarely, but still sometimes found in the marine world before they become extinct by the Cretaceous mass extinction. But what's cool about Priohybotis is that it has a tooth with a very high crown and cutting edges on it that are denticulated. It has cusplets that are denticulated as well. And this is a really interesting feature because hybodonts don't often get serrated. And this tooth was serrated and probably a very good tooth for cutting, especially fish around that time. I would imagine this would have been a well-suited animal for. So I had Priohybotis for number one. I had Amphicatylus,
Yep.
which was a crocodilian in the Jurassic, and it's one of the first crocodilians that resembles the modern day crocodilians. It was not the largest by like today's standards. It was smaller than an alligator around, but it's still pretty cool. And they were able to close their throat off from their mouth while breathing, which would allow them to tackle prey while they're in the water, which is
Yeah, modern crocs do that.
yeah. But this isn't something that was super common with
Right. Yeah, this is an
crocodilians
innovation
before.
on their end.
Yeah. So this is right when we're starting to see, I guess, like the modern crocodilian plan come to fruition. And that's one of the examples of that. And then my last pick is Siderops, which, how I was saying with the past animal that crocodilians started getting their rise, Siderops was kind of the opposite. It's from a lineage of amphibians. It was a temnospondyle. These aren't closely related to the modern day amphibians. And this was a around like 8.5 to like 8.9 feet long animal with this massive head that was in the early Jurassic of Australia. It was one of the last of these. They got into the Cretaceous with Koolasuchus, but outside of that, it was still like on the very tail end of this predominantly Paleozoic and Triassic type of animal.
Hmm. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Jurassic temnospondyl, which I mean I knew there was a ghost lineage because Koolasuchus, but I did not know that we had one. So cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Coolest is that Cretaceous temnospondyl, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so
The Australian one, yeah.
that's so.
Relic.
I didn't even know that existed until our last podcast. I think I'm still mind blown.
You're the one that didn't watch Walking with Dinosaurs, right?
Yeah, my
It's
paleo
why.
in Walking with Dinosaur. You need to rectify that like immediately.
my paleo interest only started when I was 20 because of fish.
Uh-huh.
So like that was. I mean, I went through the same dinosaur phase that every kid does, but yeah, I only got into it when I was 20. So that's like what 3 years ago, 4 years ago now.
Well, those are our sacred texts, and I suggest you familiarize yourself with our culture.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What you have to do is start watching the Nigel Marven spin-off series if you like fish, because he has a what's it, Seven Deadliest Seas
Mhm.
series where he like explores like the
Yeah.
Devonian, the Triassic, um,
He
Hell's Aquarium.
he
Yeah,
better
that's number one.
yeah.
But
He better have gone into the Western Interior Seaway if you
yeah,
want.
Yeah, that was the number one most deadly sea of all time, according to this fake documentaries
Good, good.
take on it. But it's a very charming show, and it's like part of the Walking with Dinosaurs canon. It's the same production company, so like the same models are being used. Uh,
I
and
I saw the Ballad of Big Al as a kid. Like I had the same
okay.
dinosaur phase that other
I
kids.
was listening to the Ballad of Big Al soundtrack to hype me up for this podcast going into it.
Yeah, honestly, I've kind of become that way with Prehistoric Planet. Their soundtrack, I use it in a lot of my videos, actually, like straight up. Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings and Prehistoric Planet are like
Nice.
percent of my music composition. Anyway, to get back on track though, you had a croc train going, Ben, and I'm going to continue that. So, mine, which I outright stole from Zeke, is Goniophilus. And to be fair, Zeke suggested it, but I don't know much about it, so I'm curious what makes Goniophilus a choice.
It's in the Morse Formation.
It's a Morrison formation, croc is,
Yep, and it's around for the entire Jurassic duration.
dude. And you know what? Crocs in general are still here today, so goated body plan.
Yep.
Zeke's
Because like the croc bot, like people talk about like crocodiles like originating in the Triassic, which is like technically true, but they're not doing the crocodile thing like in the same way that crocodiles do, modern crocodiles do, until the early Jurassic, kind of like sharks in a way.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting because it's weird that like what the way we think about crocodiles is like the unusual way.
Yeah.
Like historically, like crocodiles used to run. Like
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah. And, like I think it's fun that like so many different groups have taken their stab at being a semi-aquatic ambush predator, and only crocodiles are the ones still around.
Yeah,
Like and like chemist models did it. Like three different groups of archosaurs did it. Dinosaurs did it, depending on what you think about Spinosaurs.
yeah,
Mammals did it. Mammals
right,
did it with ambulocetids and stuff.
bro. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. And you know what? It's usually because you become fully marine or you just go extinct. Like the lizards tried to do it. I guess they're kind of doing it now with the iguanas, but when they tried to do it, they just ended up turning into mosasaurs. So yeah, it's usually how it rolls. No one likes that in between state historically.
Do you have any other picks?
I do not. I tried.
That's fair. I don't think we need three picks for the freshwater.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
hard.
jump.
If you're judging us, and if you're like listening to this and judging us, imagine you're not a Jurassic freshwater researcher, and then try and go find something interesting about freshwater Jurassic animals. It's tough.
I mean, I'm not a Jurassic freshwater researcher, but
Bro was
I will
well.
say I'm gonna actually jump in with Andy's things because he actually picked Burksuchus, which is also a very early crocodilian, and potentially, according to the 2021 phylogeny where it was described, it might actually be the earliest definite Neosuchian, which is the group leading to modern day crocodilians, as opposed to a lot of those kinds that were, running around on land and such.
Pseudosuchians,
Yeah, the
which are
Notosuchians is
actually fake crocs that are actually real crocs, but they're
yeah,
fake crocs still.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's it's all a bunch of stuff. Um, anyway, so that's another one. I think we're really touching on a lot of this crocodilian stuff here. He also picked Castrocata, which is this almost beaver-like mammal, where it seemingly would have been living in and around water quite a good bit, and eating various plants and such from what was around. But yeah, it's really interesting to see that mammals were still diversifying pretty well there. Um, and then the last one he picked, I think, is wildly interesting now that I know that it exists. But it's Carataviella popovi, which is a small, like, water insect. But really importantly, it is the first evidence of insects caring for their young. And
Aw.
seeing as how water insects are still around, that's a pretty good pick there because it's like, oh yeah, no, they're still knocking about, and this kind of caring for young might be a really good indication that this could be part of the reason for that. So yeah, I thought that his pick on that was brilliant.
Yeah, that's
Smart
so.
guy.
Oh,
He's very plugged in on the current papers. Am I the last one?
Yes,
I
sir.
still have to go through mine as
Okay, go.
well.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, cool. No worries. Um, so I'm being a little bit obtuse, but I'll get to there later. The very first one that I picked is Caruas charovi, which is one of the
I know
earliest
this.
which
I
is one
know
of the
this.
earliest
It's from Zoo
salamanders.
Tycoon 1, the amphibian house.
Yeah.
It's not
So
even in the game. It's just a little like icon that you can click, and I remember this.
yeah, but it's one of the earliest known like true salamanders, which again, this is right after the Triassic, and during the
Mhm.
Triassic, we have some evidence of some of our modern groups of amphibians showing up, but this one is the first one where it's like this is a salamander, and we have the whole thing, and we know exactly what it is.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's a really good shout as we're starting to try and get closer to modern day organisms. Um, for what's the king of it. And then I have two that are very ornery. The first one is four isolated teeth. from the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology
Oh, I know
collections
where this is going.
S01 to S04, which are all plesiosaur teeth found within lacustrine, which is lake-based, and fluvial
Okay.
river environments.
This is not where I thought it was
So it
going.
is a
I thought,
freshwater
yeah,
plesiosaur.
this is cooler than where I thought it was going.
I might be going there next. Anyway, but a
Okay.
freshwater plesiosaur, it's not named, it's just these four teeth. But considering that a lot of this is lacustrine and that formation, the Jinhe formation, I think it's really neat. Um, the other one that I picked is the orneriest one, which is Ostafricosaurus, which
There
is
we go. Yeah, that's
a,
where I thought we were going.
a potential spinosaur tooth from the Tendaguru beds in Tanzania. That proposes A, that it is a spinosaur, and B, that spinosaurs were hanging out in fresh water, both of which are pretty contentious. Uh, and I do know some people are working on this with some of these fossils, so we'll see if it is that taxonomically. But I just thought it would be funny to chime in Spinosaurus and
Dinosaurs. Uh, cool. Yeah, I mean that freshwater plesiosaur is awesome. I love freshwater marine reptiles. Like fully, that's awesome. The mosasaurs did it. I don't know. I don't think ichthyosaurs did it. I don't think there's any evidence of that, unfortunately. But
no,
it's
not that
not.
I know
It's
of.
not. It's not wet enough for them. They need to be really wet. And fresh water is just not wet enough. Okay, so my turn.
Yep.
So I've got two picks, and I'll just like snipe somebody else as a token third. But the first, and they start with the same name. Um, First pick is Ceratodus. It's a lungfish. It was around for the entire Mesozoic, but it occurs in the Morris Formation. There's like 30 different species, but with it, in the case of like a lungfish, that's like actually plausible, not necessarily a wastebasket thing. So lungfish are cool. They're one of the two last surviving Sarcopterygian groups. Sarcopterygians, for those in the know, are lobe-fin fish, which are fish that have arm bones like we do instead of just rays
I was
coming
going
out
to
of them.
say three groups of Sarcopterygians. You're forgetting about the
Oh
tetrapods.
my God. You're the guy who's saying chickens are your
Uh,
favorite dinosaur.
all right, so
Hey, they taste great, battered and deep fried.
I know, I
I
understand. I
made a
understand.
post. I made a short video that was saying that the largest fish alive today is the blue whale, and
Yeah,
I definitely got some flack for it. But
some
the
hate
broader
comments.
point of that isn't just to be like snarky at people, but it's because people should understand that we don't just share a common ancestor with the lobefin fish, but we are a
Or
lobefin
yeah, it's a
directly.
useful educational tool to reinforce these like cladistic ideas of grouping based on descent and not grouping based on vibes or
But
arbitrary. I stole that bit from the Skeleton Crew, but grouping based on like arbitrarily assigned hierarchies. But grouping based on objective common descent, which is really the only way to group animals. That's not just us arbitrarily drawing lines through things. So it's a useful tool for that, but there is it is kind of rubbing the cat the wrong way when I'm like, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" Because I want to talk about like giant prehistoric lizards. Somebody says chicken because they want to demonstrate how in the know they are.
it
But
reminds it reminds me of all those different, not even just like paleontology students, just like bio students that have derived fish in their bio.
yeah,
It's like the common like stereotypical like derived fish. It's like okay, whatever.
I always just stick with glorified lungfish.
there you go.
Fried lungfish.
So speaking of back to the lungfish, Ceratodus, one of the last groups of Sarcopterygians surviving, Sarcopterygians being lobefin fish, which means they would have all lobefin fish have a humerus, a radius, and an ulna, and then a complex at the end of that. So like we do, instead of just rays coming out. And there the other group being the coelacanth surviving, and then tetrapods being everything that has bones but is not a fish. So Ceratodus, it's around for a long time. Fossils are in the Morse Formation. I love the Morse Formation. Cool. So there's that one, and then starting with the same Greek root, I'm going to be extremely ornery to steal Zeke's phrasing and pick Ceratosaurus Nasocornis to resurrect and have some fun with an old Bob Bacher hypothesis that Ceratosaurus was a semi-aquatic predator, and that's how they were coexisting with Allosaurus in the Morrison Formation. Did this happen? Probably not, but it's fun to think about. So
I didn't even know that that was something that people were talking about.
I mean, people were talking about it like 35 years ago, but
Backer's thrown out some crazy ideas over the years.
yeah,
Some really good
honestly,
ones.
he has the right to do so. He deserves that honor. He deserves to be kooky and eccentric. Uh, so yeah, so that's it. And then I'll go with Goniopholis because another Morse formation croc. So although its best records come out of Europe, and the Morse formation stuff's not great. And none of the Morse formation semi-aquatic animals are very good. Definitely strongly like preferentially preserving dinosaur material.
Mm-hmm. So
So
I think as far as the top three goes, I do feel like Ceratodus is a very prominent genus in the Jurassic, and because it's so long-lived and influential on our side of the evolutionary tree, I do think that Ceratodus makes sense to be a contender.
I agree.
yep,
I
Yeah, I'm not totally opposed to that either.
yep,
Freshwater
Yeah.
bias Caesar exist, and I think that's a good option for them.
yep. All right. Do we want to put the Temnos model or one of the Crocs in the next slot?
We
We
need
should-
to put the croc in there, I
Okay.
think.
Which croc?
I
Ceratosaurus.
saw Croc's rule from Jared.
Yes.
Which croc are we thinking though?
I think Andy's with Berksukas is
I
probably the
agree.
best one because if that's
Yep.
the basal most, at least according to current phylogenies, Neosuchian, it has to be that one because that is the ancestral condition to all modern crocs, more or less.
As
Cool.
as we've established, two things equal cool on this podcast. Big equals cool, rare equals cool, and now also basal equals cool. So
Yep. And as we've established, we're a very pro-cool podcast. We're pro-fun.
And also, people say we hate invertebrates, so we got to do the water bug.
no,
I think that is a
I
great
was gonna
one.
say the plesiosaur. I like the
I
freshwater
also do like the
plesiosaur.
plesiosaur teeth.
I
We did get an insect in here for the air
Yeah.
section, I will point
Yeah.
out.
I want Ceratosaurus so bad.
No, that's gonna draw fire. Like that's gonna draw some serious.
And picking Austrofreakosaurus wouldn't. Uh,
Cryohybotus is always a nice choice.
We can do Bode. We can do the Bode.
Yeah.
Plus, Austin.
it's really like the only Jurassic occurrence of the plesiosaur, and with it being also a fluvial system, it could connect to the ocean, so that I think would be a knock against the plesiosaur.
And it doesn't have freak in its name. So honestly, I'm just saying. That's
We should do Austrofreakosaurus and just tell people, hey, we're doing a Spinosaur for freshwater. The most uncontroversial subject in paleo.
Remember? Yeah, that's exactly what we need. We need more hot takes about Spinosaurus in paleo science communication.
So, which one were we thinking for the third pick?
Freakosaurus.
No. We're not doing
Okay.
Austrofreakosaurus.
You don't want your name attached to that? That's fair. Yeah, please. Well, I mean,
There is the normal size salamander.
yeah.
Well, what about
Coronavirus.
Siderops? The Temnos
What do you mean the
model, that's like
Temnos
almost
model?
9
Well,
feet long.
You were like we can't do the plesiosaurus because it's in the system that's open to the ocean. Yeah, all river systems are open to the ocean.
But they were
It's
found
close.
in the
I get your point.
river
It's close
and
to-
in the lake
Yeah, it's in
systems. So
transition.
it's,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. But
I mean, you could do it though because it's basically Nessie. It's living in a
yeah, real life Nessie. There's four cool points. There's the cultural one.
Plus marine
Actually,
reptiles.
it's not basic, so it's only three. But
So you're saying that we want IVPG S01 to S04 as our third pick?
it just rolls
Yes.
off the tongue, doesn't it?
yeah,
Okay, we can do that. So there we have
Two-
it. That's all of our picks for the Kings of the Jurassic. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you everyone for watching this. This was a really fun episode to do, and Andy had to drop out early, but we really do want to thank him for his in-depth talk on his latest research. That was
Awesome. We really appreciate that contribution.
yeah. Let us
Yeah.
know in the comments what your kings of the Jurassic would be and whether you think that the water bug should in fact be a king or not.
Let us know how upset you are that Saurophaganax is dead. We need to give this a very clickbaity title, like Saurophaganax dead, like in all caps. I think that
Saurophaganax
would-
author in the chat. No snacks allowed.
Yeah, there you go.
I wonder how he's going to feel watching back at this, knowing that we're talking about his research and also Ceratosaurus being semi-aquatic in the same video.